Welcome to the Love Mondays podcast. My goal is to bring inspiring and authentic guests on the show who can help everyone love their Mondays and every other day of the week, to be truly excited and intentional every day of the week. My guest today is Valaderes. He's a physiotherapist who spent over a decade helping people move and feel better, only to realize that many of them were still stuck in financial pain. So he took his problem-solving skills from the clinic to the world of personal finance, where he now teaches healthcare professionals and anyone willing to listen how to build wealth and make smarter money moves. When he's not talking about compound interest or injury rehab, he's probably convincing himself that buying more real estate counts as diversifying his portfolio. And the cool connection that I have with Robin is we played on the soccer field many years ago. And I'm still a lot older than him, but it's really fun for me to see him really unleashing his skill set to the world. So Robin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the opportunity. And yes, we met many years ago when you showed me how the ropes are moving around on the pitch. So it's nice to kind of communicate on this side of the pitch.
Fantastic. It's always evolving, right? So my first question is always around helping people who don't love their Mondays, don't love what they're doing. What advice would you give them in order to find something they truly love and get fulfillment and joy? And I love how you're evolving your career now and saying, look, I love personal finance. I want to teach it. And more than that, not just you want to, you're actively doing it. So what advice would you give to my listeners?
Yeah, great question, because oftentimes we do what we do on a daily basis because we need to, not because we want to. We don't have that choice. And I see it in my profession, I see it with my colleagues, is having some sort of side project or some sort of passion that fulfills you. And the concept is something from like a Japanese proverb called ikigai, where you have things that you're very good at, things the world need, things that you get paid for, and then things that you're competent at. And if you can get those four things, it might not be your 9 to 5, but it could be your 5 to 7 o'clock job where you can start to have more creativity or fulfillment. It's finding something else that kind of lights you up aside from work, aside from family, that you can kind of lean into and pour into to grow.
Amazing. And yeah, so the ikigai concept comes up in every podcast I do. I love it.
Wow.
And I'm very familiar with it. So how did you know that personal finance, compound interest, and things like that were something that would give you a lot of joy?
And at first it didn't, but I think I was blessed with the opportunity to realize this at a young age. In my last unit of physiotherapy school, I was with a preceptor or instructor at the time, clinical instructor, and Margaret, here's the name, I remember it vividly. Margaret said, "Hey, Robin, look around you." And at this point, you did 4 years of undergrad, you're 2 years into your master's program, you volunteered to get into the school, and then you had clinical placement. So you've done a fair bit of on-site training. She said, "Hey, Robin, look around you and tell me how many clinicians you know, or physiotherapists we'll call them, who are actively practicing hands-on therapy inside the clinic on a day-to-day basis, who are over the age of 50 or 55. And I took a step back. I'm like, okay, I did about 6 years here. I could think, honestly, Ron, maybe 5% of the people in the practice who are working past that age. And she's like, okay, what else are they doing? And I had to step back and say, I had no idea. So you start to understand that your ability to earn an income as a therapist, even if you hurt yourself, look at the clinicians you're going to see, you're generally seeing people under the age of 45 or 50. Because the tenure, the time frame, it's an emotional burden, it's a physical burden, it's a spiritual burden. So you might not live in your career to 65 like maybe our counterparts. So you have to understand, okay, if I can't generate wealth past 55, what else will I do? Because I know based on medical, tech, and longevity signs, I might live till 90. But if I'm done earning income at 55 and I'm passing away at 90, I got 35 years there. I have to understand how money works. And that was kind of the impetus for me to start learning about how money works.
And did you like learning about money?
No, initially it was quite overwhelming and scary because you weren't taught this in your high school, weren't taught this your undergrad, weren't taught this your master's degree. Your friends aren't talking about it, or at least weren't talking about it. So it's like anything else that's overwhelming. You kind of push it off. But then you understand how you as an individual myself, can leverage it, learn about it, and apply it, and how it impacts my life. Then I became a lot more interested.
I love it. Okay, so we've got two different topics here that I'd love to dive into. It's pretty unique to have an expert with two disciplines like yours. So let's start with the first one, physiotherapy. And I know you have 4 tips for my listeners. Let's hear them.
Yes, thank you. And this is for people I've seen over the last 13 odd years in an orthopedic setting. So it's very much to the MSK, musculoskeletal, not so much the internal. But oftentimes, even now, post COVID, we are more stuck at home or at a desk. Yes, we have walking desks, but we also have more of the traditional sitting down desks. And I see a lot of clients come in who will say, Robin, I don't have time. And I'm 8 o'clock in the morning on the computer till 5 p.m. in the afternoon on the computer. I don't get up and move. And they come in with neck pain or shoulder pain or mid back pain, which is quite common. But I do something simple as like the 90-minute rule. Your body is built to move, believe it or not. Motion is the lotion, is the saying I often tell my clients. The more we move, the better it is. And it's the idea of these small, bite sized chunks of movement, whether it's after every 90 minutes, get up, get a glass of water, do a stretch, which I can get to later, and sit back and move. Good for your body, good for your blood, good for your mind. Something as simple as that, and you compound that, you'll see the results in terms of, oh, I don't feel so stiff anymore. My neck feels better. My blood flows better. My mind is better. That's a simple one that we take for granted is go on your Apple phone, go on your Android phone every 90 minutes, put a reminder, it'll ding you, it'll buzz you, get up and move a little bit. And then that might not break up the day a little easier for you. You won't feel so stiff and achy after work if you do.
I love
Um,
it.
yeah. The next thing is about like those three different stretches you can do. And it's, I'm going to go based on the problem areas I see often: neck, mid back, low back. Generally for people who are more sedentary in nature or at a desk all day, you can do something called a wall angel. A wall angel is as simple as you put your back against the wall, hands up in the scarecrow position, making sure your shoulder blades making contact, your neck's making contact. That's open up in your chest, stretching out your back, and sliding your hands up and down, making sure you can get nice big inhalations and breaths. And I'll keep your chest open versus the alternative, which is hunch forward, chin forward in the slouch position. That's the wall angel. Something I do every morning is something called a bretzel. Harder to describe on this the podcast on this forum, but you'd be on your side of your back and trying to open up your mid back and your lower back and then your glute area. Common tension point for some people. And lastly, something you don't need a bed for, you don't need a wall for, is the toe touch. For your lower back, your hamstrings that are particularly tight, your calves, basically touching your toes, making sure your knees are straight. You do that on a regular basis, guess what? As we age, we inherently become a lot more plastic, less elastic. Those three things will help you preserve some of that elasticity as we get older.
Yeah, I love it. So it's interesting. So a bit of a question for you. So I called you last week because I had a knee injury in my soccer game. I woke up and I couldn't walk. Maybe that happens at my age. But coincidentally, there's one day where I do some yoga, and they always say legs up the wall is a really good pose. I don't know if you've heard of that. But I was having these knee issues, and they were slowly getting better. I was keeping you updated, and I did that legs up the wall, and honestly, I felt like almost perfectly better. And look, it wasn't 100% better, but I've been doing that every day since then. We're just lying down with my legs up the wall, and yeah, it's been pretty powerful, and I think it takes a lot of the pressure off the back. So even for me, just 5-10 minutes of that has been a massive game changer for me.
Lovely to hear. And it's a real life example. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the practical stretches. Okay, cool. So you got the stretches. What else?
Then you have the 90-minute rule. The last one of the last two are kind of mindset based. And I see this almost on a daily basis when I'm in the clinic. Someone comes in, let's say they have a busted up knee. They come in, they feel a lot of pain, and then they haven't done anything because the mindset is any pain that you and I as humans are unfamiliar with or uncertain about, we will automatically default to assuming that pain is a harmful stimulus. We will avoid it at all costs because we do not want to make it worse. So we'll do, hey, guess what? I won't do it. On the pitch, you have a tough 90-minute game. You get off the pitch, you're sore that night, you're sore the next morning. Then you have a hurtful stimulus. You went over and above your threshold. Anytime we do that physically, we have this response. The response is tight muscles, sore back, you feel a little stiff. That's not a harmful thing. That's a hurtful thing because you went over and above your stimulus. But it's the assumption that putting weight on my broken knee, or not broken, sorry, my injured knee is a harmful thing for me to do. I'm not going to do it. But how else are you going to learn how to walk again? How else are you going to stimulate the blood flow? So then the threshold of movement lowers down, so much so that the mere act of putting your toe down becomes a painful thing. If you think it's harmful, you'll avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So I was having that very debate yesterday as I was warming up for my game. So I played yesterday, and I was feeling a little bit discomfort before the game. So I wasn't sure how it's going to be. And I literally made a decision because I remembered you saying motion is lotion. And I was like, okay, I got Robin over here. And honestly, I played, it warmed up, and it felt like I was ready to go again. Whereas the previous week, I had this very tentative mindset. And so it's very difficult to separate physical and mental. But I love what you're saying around, hey, just it's okay to push it a little and feel like what is the mental part? What is the physical part?
Agreed. And I use the other side. Let's say you injured your right knee. I'd say if you can do it on your left side, like putting weight on it, squatting, kneeling, you can do it. It's not a harmful thing because your left knee can do it. So the right side should be able to do it, right? Barring any
Yeah,
kind of catastrophic injury to the knee, like a fracture, for example. So that's the thought process. But we will automatically, you and I are wired the same way to avoid threats, avoid harm, and we group everything to that bucket versus saying, okay, let me do some second order processing and seeing what the stimulus is, and should I be pursuing it?
love it, love it. Okay, so is there one more on the physical side?
They want more physical, maybe similar to the desk ergonomics we talked about earlier, but something to be mindful of is the concept of time under tension. And thought process is, hey, Robin, I'm sitting at a desk all day. I might have my neck forward in this forward posture, and my shoulders are rounded like this. So I should go to the gym and work on strengthening my mid to lower back. That is sometimes the verbiage you hear with the therapist or society in general. The idea is that you don't have a particularly weak back. It's just not turned on or activated in the same position for a length of time. Quote unquote, here it is. I want to lose weight, but I only eat one good salad a week and everything else is rubbish. Am I going to lose weight? No, because the time under tension of eating a good meal on a regular basis isn't there. The time under tension of being in a good position for a period of time isn't there. So you can go to the gym and do an hour workout on your mid back, but then spend 8 hours on a daily basis in a poor position. How is that an hour going to tip the scales in your favor? It's not. So spend more time in a better position versus doing more strengthening exercises and assuming that's going to translate or relay into a better posture. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, and it's back to your 90-minute rule, and ideally it'd be less than 90 minutes, I think. And
Ideally,
for
yeah.
me, it's like, how do you get up more often? How do you go for walks? How do you do the simple things to just get your body moving like it's supposed to? And if you're sitting for 40, 50 hours a week at a desk, as you said, it's time under tension that will prevail.
Correct. And then don't underestimate the intensity or the severity on the benefits. Despite something like walking or standing up straight, it's a lot better than slouching or sitting down for a period of time. And
Yeah.
compound that like anything else, like your money, you'll see the results.
Amazing. Well, that's a perfect bridge to our next topic. So I'm actually going to start with, before you give your tips, are there any like books that, like Warren Buffett book or something that resonated for you to help you understand it? Like for me, back in the days, I read The Wealthy Barber, which I think is still around. And it was a
Yes.
cool little story that just helped understand it. Or Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Like there's some really cool books that just help people understand it. Anything that really shaped your desire to teach people?
Lovely question. And it was the mindset shift with reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and understanding the cash flow quadrant, whether you're an employee, sole proprietor, business owner, and investor. And I didn't know those four things existed, right? When you're in academia or in medicine, you're really thought to be in one employee role for the rest of your life. And then you're like, oh, I can also be a self-employed person. I can be an owner of a clinic or industry, or I can also be an investor, and I can do it multiples at the same time potentially. But that was the book that changed the way I thought about money and how I thought about employment. Really,
Fantastic. Okay, so let's run down your 5 tips to help people gain financial knowledge, independence, and just be more comfortable in that area.
yeah. The first one I'd say, and I felt this myself 5 years ago during the height of the pandemic, when medical health professionals in the private setting weren't able to work because X, Y, and Z lockdowns prevented us from kind of practicing our profession. And that was a challenge because you're an adult and you're like, okay, I have all these skill sets. I'm able to work. I just the geography I'm located in didn't allow it. But if you didn't have another secondary, tertiary source of income, guess what? Your primary source is taken from you for a period of time. Your obligations still rack up. And the assumption is I can earn my way with one income to wealth is a faulty assumption. So this is where it taught me, hey, diversification of revenue streams is crucial. Okay. So I can mitigate some of the downturns that I can't expect, these black swan events. But if I didn't have some assets that I owned previously, I'd be in tougher waters throughout that period of time. So the message is you have one income stream, which can be valuable, but you're also one step away from being impoverished. Because if that's taken for you, your fault or not your fault, what else are you going to do? You can't rely on one income stream. So income and wealth are quite different. That's the kind of the first tip or message I'd say.
Perfect. And what can people do? So you were telling me like you're involved in Airbnb, you've got your financial newsletter. What's
Yeah.
one thing that got you started with Haste? actually working on that side hustle?
Was Rich Dad Poor Dad, like I mentioned earlier, and buying assets, things that put money in your pocket, as Robert Kiyosaki said. And for me, was buying real estate earlier on that actually cash flowed in the area, meaning I get paid something for owning it every month. I'm not just speculating on the appreciation of that asset going up. So that helped in terms of, okay, now I can buy an asset. It pays me money. I can loan against the asset to buy more assets. Now I control two assets with one loan, and I can grow my portfolio that way. It's collateralized against the actual property. So I'm hedging some risk. So that's what helped in terms of starting this. And once you go down that track, guess what? You attract people who are thinking the same as you. You put yourself in positions where you're in circles of individuals who are doing the same, and those people tend to feed and you tend to grow, and they're all very, for the most part, similar minded, so like to help and people flourish. You learn different strategies throughout that, and then you try other things where, like, oh, I got a bedroom and bathroom in my room, I don't use it but I'm heating and cooling it, let me rent it on Airbnb, take that income and do something else with it. Right. So that's what really helped me in saying, okay, when the pandemic hit, thankfully I had a couple rental properties to help satisfy my obligations. If I didn't have it, oh gosh, I might have to go into debt to satisfy
Yeah,
obligations.
amazing. Okay, what else? Give me some more.
Okay. Next one up is, um, for people who have a hard time with their relationship with money, especially when they have money in their hand or money in their checking or savings account and not spending it, is it's 2025. Automation is at your literal fingertips. So if you're someone who's on a variable income, you have your budget set up, you know what percentage you earn in terms of expenses and income and what you should be saving versus investing. Take the hard part of taking that money yourself manually or digitally and inputting it manually or digitally, and let an automation take place. So, for example, every month you get paid $2,500 every 2 weeks. You know you're going to put away $500 in your month to your TFSA. So automatically on the Friday of payday, so every 2 weeks, $250 goes from my bank account to my trading account or my investment account without me doing anything. And believe it or not, you might forget about it as you do as the business of life takes over. And you come back at the end of the year and said, oh, I just contributed $6,000. That's great. It's automated versus having the temptation of doing it yourself and saying, I might want a nice sweater today. It's awfully cold. Let me spend that there first.
Yeah.
Right. That's the behavioral psychology of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then the compounding kicks in with that as well, right? So, of course, 6,000, but then you start adding compound interest to that, and it's just unbelievable, right?
Huge. And the key variable there, Ron, you know this, aside from your interest rate, is when you start to invest, the time horizon. So the earlier you are, the better. And people say, I can't put $500 a month away. I'm like, that's fine. Put more than $0 away, because anything above zero compounds. So put $1 away, put $10 away. It's going to help your future self.
Love it.
Third tip would be thinking long term. I think it's even more challenging in this day and age where everything's more on the forefront in terms of what our gauge or aperture is looking like. But for me, it's like, okay, I know I want to be at a certain age before I retire. I need a certain amount of income before I retire or savings. That's my goal. How do I work my way back to see what my shortcomings right now financially? And what do I need to do on a monthly, yearly basis to obtain that goal? And I think we're very nearsighted. We don't think about our age 55 or age 65-year-old self when you're in your 20s or 30s. I think you should, because your decisions you make now will definitely impact it if you're compounding particularly well, your future self. And you don't want to be 10 years, 20 years senior and saying, I wish I coulda, I shoulda, I woulda, because then you can't go back in time.
Yeah, I like that, just to have a longer time horizon.
Agreed. Yeah. I don't know. I think society nowadays, everything's instant gratification, which is going to be my fifth point, but something like we're just too focused on the present, not too much on the future.
Cool. Okay, let's go to number 4.
I struggle with this is the idea of good debt versus bad debt. I think culturally and generationally, I was raised to think that most debt is bad, not to incur debt, not to take debt on because it can ruin your life. And it can if it's not treated well. Not until I started owning real estate that I understand there's good debt where you can leverage particularly well if it's collateralized well versus bad debt, and exploring options based on the return of my debt. So a good example, I asked my clients, and I had one this morning. I said, okay, Ron, let's say you're going to the bank and you're going to try to buy a business, but you need a loan. And the bank says, Ron, sure, I'll give you the loan, but it's going to cost you 12% interest. What's your first reaction?
And for me, I would look at that rate to say, what's my return going to be? I mean, it does sound like a pretty high rate. So I would try and negotiate that rate down. And I would obviously want to look at, okay, what am I getting out of that business? And I'd look at the time horizon, I'd look at the cash flow of the business, and I'd probably have many, many other questions.
Awesome answer, because you're one of the few people who's thought that way. Most people will say, Robin, that's abhorrently high. I can't do it. Without doing the second order thinking of saying, okay, it might be high relative to what? What is my return? 12% on a 30%, 12% loan on a 30% ROI, that's 18% spread versus an 8% loan on a 9% ROI. That's a 1% spread. Sure, it's cheaper, but what's your return? So do the second order thinking. Understand if you leverage well and it's collateralized well, your return might be higher. If you don't think like that, you dismiss that opportunity because you assume all debt is bad.
Yeah, I really like that because even, I was talking to a friend and they might be coming into some money and they said the first thing they're going to do is pay down their mortgage. And so if what would you say to folks like that who, I was conditioned the same way, let's get rid of debt, but there is a different way of thinking. So yeah, and look, mortgage rates are higher now than they were 3 years ago. So I think 3 years ago, it's a very simple decision. To me, it would not make sense to pay off the mortgage right away. But how would you assess that?
I love this because I get this often. First, we'll go under the pretense that we paid off high interest credit card debt, right? The 20 points are gone. That's paid off because that makes complete sense. Then, if you're going to kind of mid to low range debt, there's two variables. One is the mathematic one, and one is the emotional one. Let's tackle the emotional one. The emotional one is what do I need to do to sleep at night well? Is there a sleep at night factor? Some people are hardwired to be very anxious and worried that any sort of debt over the head interrupts their livelihood. They don't sleep
Yes.
well, they don't eat well. That is very important. So it depends how you're wired. That is the emotional. So that you can't discount that. You shouldn't, at least. Then the mathematics. Okay, it's a 4% mortgage, the 5% mortgage. Do you think confidently you can obtain a higher return than 4 or 5%, the interest on your mortgage, other means? And that could be, yes, I think the S&P 500 historically in the last 100 years has gone up 10%. If you're comfortable with that, you might invest at 10% potentially. Funny enough, it's not often it hits 10%. It's a huge range from like minus 30 to plus 40
Yeah.
that it rarely hits the 10%, but the average is around 10%. So you can take that volatility, that swing, you might make the 10%, your loan is 4%, you take that spread of 6, and that's better use of opportunity cost of that money. But that's the mathematics, but you have to pair the mathematics with the emotional.
Yeah. And it's also thinking, how, like, for example, I love the point about it could be minus 20, it could be plus 30, but it averages to 10. So if you actually need the cash flow urgently, it might make sense to think about it. But if you've got a longer time horizon, like we were talking about earlier, then the 10% is going to win out. So I love the thinking and looking at all the variables. And a big part of this is educating ourselves on the variables, right? As opposed to going back to here's how our parents did it, or here's the word. And, you talked about the emotional piece. The Psychology of Money is one of the most famous books related to money. So what's your thought on that piece? Like I see your giant smile there. So tell me what's going through your mind.
I love that book. I think it's very applicable. B, it's digestible for someone who doesn't understand it because there's stories in there and it makes complete sense. So I think Morgan did a fabulous job. Us as investors, let's say you're an investor, there are 3 ways we can definitely benefit in our investments. Okay. So you can have algorithmic, okay, analytical. So it's informational, analytical, and then behavioral. You can get the most up-to-date information. You might have a legal insider scoop on certain things because you get the information fast. Sure, you can profit that way because you're the first to enter a position. Then you might have the best algorithm that can analyze, hey, buy, sell based on earnings, whatever. Retail investors don't have the best information. Retail investors don't have the best analytics. What we do have, if we can control well, is the best behavioral mindset to it. When to buy, when to sell, or when not to sell. If we can understand how we react emotionally to these stressors or these stimulus, we can make better decisions despite our lack of information and our lack of analytics. So I think the behavioral edge, if you can understand it well and how you respond to certain stimulus, can outweigh the other 2 disadvantages we have.
Yeah, it's interesting how, like, a few years ago when the markets just crashed, right? And I remember talking to my financial planner, and it was his duty to ask me, what do you want to do with your money? And he was telling me many of his clients were selling. And it was close to the bottom. And then I was like, okay, no point selling at this point, let's hold in general. And over the next couple of years, it rebounded and went even higher, right? But the psychology, or it just feels like, okay, you got to do something, is it's a temptation, right? And that's where the education that you're talking about here is really important to say, okay, what's the track record of the markets, right? At what point does it come back? And that was a very interesting case study over the last few years, where now I think the markets were up like 20+% with all the stuff going on, right? So it's very interesting to look at the patterns and try to use them to your advantage.
Agreed. And this brings me back to a study and a story at the same time. And I can't remember if it's Fidelity or Vanguard, but they had a snapshot of a decade, 2001, 2011. And what they wanted to analyze is, of the account holders in that institution, which account holders fared the best throughout a very rocky decade, let's say 2008, the financial crisis. And they said, okay, what are two variables that made you a better investor from 2001, 2011? And do you know what those two variables of account holders that they all shared in common? Number one is they either passed away or they forgot their password to log in, meaning they made no changes. They didn't
Yeah.
sell anything. They
Yeah.
just held on. So those two variables talks to the idea of, if you know how to control your behavior, don't lose your password, but I may sit on your hands a little bit, you'll do particularly well than someone that's often actively trading.
Yes, that's wise words. Okay, cool. Anything else from a financial standpoint?
I I think finance is a lot about mindset. And I think my last point is talking about that superpower of having delayed gratification. And it brings me to the idea of like the marshmallow test that you might have read the test
Yeah.
itself, the book itself, and how if you can delay gratification, oftentimes, especially at a young age, you tend to have more successful traits later on in life, because you can have the deference of gratification. And it's even more challenging nowadays when you have a 2 day ship around time. And then if it comes on the third day, we're annoyed. We're like, what the hell? It should be in 2 days. Take a look 50 years ago. We get there in 2 days. I think that's some sort of voodoo science then, right? So I
Yeah.
think if you can think long term, delay the short term winnings for the long term gains, you'll make more probabilistic versus possible decisions. We confuse probabilities and possibilities often. Where in the side of probabilities, the likelihood versus the ability of having something going in your favor. So that's delay gratification. And something that I've become more in tune with is the ability to change your mind when the information changes. In society, I think we view hypocrisy, which is defined as kind of flip flopping or changing your mind, as a negative outlook. When people say, oh, yeah, you said this 3 years ago, but now you're saying this, what happened? We can't trust you because you're a hypocrite. But if the situation you made a decision on 4 years ago has changed now, it's up to you, if you're a responsible individual, to update your philosophy or your thought process in today. And if that counter to what you believed in the past, great, change your mind and be unapologetic with it. We're too scared to keep consistent, regardless of what the future tells us or what we currently say, in the face of saying, oh, I don't want to demean my previous character or my identity, because that's what society deems as kind of true, versus you should be able to change your mind if the information changes. So be okay with that. That's my kind of last message. So invest in something different, because now it's changed. Apple might be different now than it was 10 years ago. Be okay with changing your philosophy, right? The information has changed. Why don't you do it?
Yeah, I like that. And just being open to new possibilities, right? And like, for example, we're talking about mortgage rates, and now they're quite different than they were 3 years ago. It might be a different decision, which I absolutely love. So actually, I'd love you to tell the marshmallow test. Like, some people might not have heard it. Can you expand on what it is?
Yeah, and I'll do my best to justify the test itself. But it was done, with 3 to 5 year old kids years ago, and they're in a room. The kid is at a desk, and the scientist at the time, the experimenter, would come in and say, listen, Bobby, you're the kid. I'm going to give you a marshmallow right now, but I'm going to go out. I got to go run to the bathroom. If I come back in 10 minutes' time and you haven't eaten the marshmallow, I'm going to give you two marshmallows. So then the experimenter leaves the room. There's a camera on the young boy, and you'll see the boy or the girl, whoever it is, like deliberate the thought process. They're tempted by it. And some will eat the marshmallow and say, oh, hope the experimenter didn't see that and I'll put it back, or eat half of it and put it back. Others will not touch it. The experimenter comes back in, and depending on what happened, might reward the person with a secondary marshmallow. And that's like, oh, yeah, this sounds like a childish experiment. But then what the study did is, hey, we found the people who were able to delay gratification, who wanted the two marshmallows, and those who didn't. And we'll follow them over 20 years in terms of their 20s and 30s. And we'll track based on a bunch of heuristic measures which individuals were deemed more successful. And what you'll see is those who can delay gratification at an early age, you don't really get taught this, right? You delay it at an early age, tend to be more successful on societal norms than those who didn't. I was like, whoa. So that I think that's what the test is about.
Yeah, and I love it. And so connecting it to the financial piece, is it like being very conscious of expenses and being very intentional in terms of expenses? So as you think about delayed gratification, because there's many people as they grow their income, their expenses grow at the same rate or even faster, where, you think about it. And look, much of that has happened to me. So I'm not saying I've been able to avoid it, but I think I'm now more conscious of what I'm spending on, more intentional to say, just because your income has gone up, are you spending just because society's spending or because it's an intentional thing for you, right? Is that how I connect that point there?
Outstanding thought. Yes. And that's, I think you're getting to is lifestyle creep, is the assumption that when I earn more and I spend more, the same difference between what I earn and spend stays the exact same as I get older. And I don't feel like getting any richer. I feel like you're treading water, you're not going anywhere. Because this is another societal thing I want to try to debunk is the assumptions that to earn or keep more money, I have to earn more money. I have to be in the clinic more often. I have to see more clients. I got to work more hours. What society doesn't do a good job is saying, forget what you earn. What or how much are you keeping? And when you ask them what you're keeping, you have to unveil some inner parts of you, but how you treat money. What are your priorities? I can make a lot more money, the delta, by not lifting a finger, by only looking at what I spend and cutting that down. Guess what? The difference increases. I don't have to go to the clinic and do another 3 hours of treating on a Saturday to earn that, right? So if you understand, and this comes back to a study that came out last year in the US, they looked at people who were making more than 100,000 US dollars. They said 44% of those people are living paycheck to paycheck. And you're like, wow, 100,000 is pretty decent salary. US based, it's 130 Canadian. It's not an earning issue, it's a spending issue. How do you, if you make that kind of money, for the most part, with lower costs, how are you living paycheck to paycheck?
Yes.
Right? It's not earning, it's spending. But we don't talk about spending, do we? No way.
Yeah, and the way society is now, it's so easy to spend, right? You just tap your phone a couple of times and you spent, or you tap your credit card. You don't even have to punch in any numbers, right? So it's very easy, and then you just see the bills later on. You don't see them right away, and so it's being very intentional with that, which I absolutely love. Amazing. I think we've covered two really cool subjects, right? Health and wealth. And anything else, Robin, you want to share with my listeners?
Thank you, Juan. I think the priority would be always on your health, because without the health, you have no wealth. So don't spend your time chasing dollars at the expense of your current and future self or your relationships with your family and friends. Because oftentimes we'll be on, if you look at obituaries or deathbeds, people have a lot of regret. And it's not regret about making money. It's sort of regretting spending time or not having a healthy body to enjoy things life gives you. So prioritize always your health over your wealth.
I love it. And it's funny. So another book that's come up a couple of times this week is The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the number one regret, and it's by nurses who were in palliative care.
Australia. And Bronnie Ware was her name. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And I haven't read it, but I've heard a lot about it. I'm going to read it soon. And the number one regret was I worked too much and I wasn't intentional and all these things. So I love how you ended with that, to say health number one, wealth is very important as well. And they are connected, right? If you're stressing about financials, it's going to have an impact on your health as well, right? Robin, thank you very much. I'm super impressed with your current path. I can tell you're loving your Mondays. And I'm always inspired by people who say, look, I'm going to take my passion and share it with the world. So I love how you're sharing that with the world, and continue to do the great work you're doing, man.
Thank you, Ron. And I love the title of the podcast and the book, Love Mondays, because everybody says happy Friday. You ask them, why can't every day be like a Friday? Right? Why don't you like Fridays as much as Mondays, kind of thing? So thank you very much for offering this.
Yeah, I love it. A friend of mine, his name's Des, he used to say, make Mondays as exciting as Fridays. And I think that was probably 10, 15 years ago. But now to me, it's like, imagine a society where people say, hey, happy Monday. And they really mean it. Like, imagine that. Like, that would be pretty cool, right? And I think you were doing your part to help get there. Okay, Robin, have a great day. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care. Bye, Ron.